Among all the emotions that rise and fall in the human mind, anger is often the sharpest. It erupts quickly, moves with force, and can take away clarity in moments when we need it most. In the Buddhist tradition, anger is placed among the three poisons. Its nature is compared to fire, because it burns fast, blinds the eye of discernment, and leaves behind the ashes of regret. Yet the same teachings also say something subtle and powerful. Fire can destroy, but fire can also refine. It depends on how it is used. The ancient question then becomes extraordinary in its simplicity. How does one turn anger into wisdom? In the Saṃyutta Nikāya, the Buddha described anger as a state that clouds perception. When the mind is filled with ill will, it cannot see things as they truly are. And the first step toward wisdom is not suppressing emotion, but recognizing this distortion. Anger is not a monster hiding inside us. It is a contraction of the heart. It is the mind tightening around something it feels unable to hold. In that sense, anger is a kind of protection. But its protection is clumsy. Like building higher walls only to lose sight of the road ahead. In everyday life, we encounter anger not as a philosophical idea, but as something deeply physical. A child's defiance, a partner's careless remark, a coworker's misunderstanding, a sudden heat in the chest, breath shortening, the pulse rising. These are not character flaws. They are biological reactions. Modern neuroscience explains this well. Research from the University of California at Davis shows that when a perceived threat appears, the amygdala activates within fractions of a second. Only later does the prefrontal cortex have the chance to form a reasoned response. When anger escalates quickly, it is often because the thinking brain simply has not arrived yet. But here is where Buddhist wisdom becomes unusually compassionate. It never says anger means we have failed. It simply says anger means the heart is hurting. Almost every act of anger has something softer hiding beneath it. A sense of being unseen, unprotected, unheard. The Majjhima Nikāya describes anger as something born from unmet expectations. And these expectations go deeper than we admit. This leads to a gentle but transformative realization. Turning anger into wisdom does not mean pushing anger down. It means seeing what expectation just cracked open. Wisdom begins when the mind stops reacting and starts noticing. In the Zen tradition, there is a line often repeated. When you see where something begins, you are already free from it. Applied to anger. This means the moment you see the spark, the flame changes direction. It stops burning outward and begins illuminating inward. Consider something simple from daily life. A parent reminds a child repeatedly to finish homework. The child ignores the request, and anger rises. But the first surge is rarely anger itself. It is helplessness. Fear that the child will fall behind. Fear that care is being dismissed. Fear that responsibility is not shared. When the parent pauses even half a second and notices the tightness in the chest, the situation changes. The object of anger is no longer the child. It becomes the tension inside the parent's own expectations. And that is where wisdom begins. Classical Buddhist texts compare anger to a startled snake. The snake is not evil. It strikes because it feels threatened. Practice does not kill the snake. It gives the snake a sense of safety. Interestingly, this echoes modern psychology. Researchers at Harvard Medical School found that when people can identify the physical sensations of anger, activity in the amygdala decreases significantly. In other words, awareness calms the alarm system. Early Buddhist meditation training, like mindfulness of breath and mindfulness of body, is essentially this same skill taught 2,000 years earlier. It is important to clarify something. Turning anger into wisdom is not the same as passivity. It is not suppression. In the Pali Canon, the Buddha described true patience not as grit, but as clarity. The calm that arises not from withdrawal, but from understanding what is happening. That clarity is what guides wise action. Anger is wind. Wisdom is the root. Wind can bend a branch, but it cannot move the whole tree. When one begins to observe anger, its deeper layers reveal themselves. Beneath the fire there is longing. Beneath longing there is fear. Beneath fear there is the fragile place where self clings to an image of how things should be. Seeing this is not weakness. It is the beginning of freedom. The Dhammapada says that the one who conquers the self is the true victor. In practice, this means recognizing anger's origin, noticing the moment the heart tightens, understanding that the world did not betray us. It was our expectation that met reality and cracked. When that crack is seen clearly, anger becomes transparent, and in transparency, wisdom appears. Even in fields far from ancient philosophy, we find parallel insights. Quantum experiments reveal that the behavior of particles changes the moment observation enters the picture. Physicists call this the observer effect. Buddhist practice uses a different language but points to the same shift. The act of seeing changes the experience itself. When you bring awareness into anger, anger cannot continue along its old trajectory. The fire bends toward light. So how does this translate into a lived practice? The transformation begins with 3 simple but powerful movements of attention. First, notice the body. Anger always arrives in the body before it arrives in words. The shoulders rise. The throat tightens. The stomach contracts. The moment these signals are recognized, the reaction slows. Awareness interrupts reflex. Second, see the expectation beneath the heat. Anger is almost always the collapse of a mental picture. Someone should behave a certain way. Life should unfold in a certain way. Reality refuses, and the picture shatters. When you shift attention from the other person to the expectation inside you, clarity returns. Third, move from reaction to response. Reaction is immediate and automatic. Response is deliberate and grounded. Even a single conscious breath can create the distance needed for wisdom to enter. In the Buddhist texts, this single breath is described as the moment when mindfulness touches the heart. With time, anger stops being something one must fight. It becomes something that reveals. It becomes a doorway. Without anger, we would never see certain parts of ourselves. We would never uncover the expectations that bind us, or the fears that hide beneath our toughness. Anger exposes the unfinished corners of the mind. And once exposed, they can be understood. This is why turning anger into wisdom is not about becoming calm all the time. It is about becoming awake within the flames. It is about recognizing the moment the heart begins to contract, and choosing not to let that contraction define our next action. It is delicate work, and yet, over time, it becomes deeply natural. When anger stops being the fire that burns others and becomes the light that reveals oneself, wisdom has already begun to grow. And when this becomes a way of living, anger is no longer a poison. It becomes clarity, strength, and understanding. In that sense, the path from anger to wisdom is not a battle. It is an unfolding. It is the heart remembering how to see.